Hello everyone, welcome to another repair video. So today we're going to be looking at a Nintendo Switch which I've got in front of me, and I'm going to be careful because it's got a customer's name on it, but here is the Nintendo Switch in question, and this Nintendo Switch has some charging issues. So a customer got in touch with me yesterday and basically said to me that she has a Nintendo Switch, it belongs to her son, and it was charging absolutely fine, working on the dock, all of that good stuff, and then all of a sudden it come up with a 0001 error. Now she didn't catch the entire error code because the console went off, but I believe that is probably a 2101-0001 error, and that is related to the power management circuit. So we've got a charging issue, but now all it does is flashes up the Nintendo logo and then the dead battery symbol. So it appears as though it's not charging. So we're going to take a look, we're going to see what we can do. But before I do that, I just want to wish everyone a Happy New Year. Just to put it into context, it is the 1st of January, so it is New Year's Day. And I hope you all had a fantastic New Year, wherever you was in the world. Personally, I just sat around doing nothing. I just chilled out, had a nice quiet New Year. I don't really drink or anything like that, so I didn't really celebrate it. But that being said, if you are new to the channel and you enjoy this type of content, bring in the new year with a bang by subscribing to me. I would really appreciate it, and if you want to support me, if you enjoy this type of content and you find it useful, then there'll be a Patreon link in the video description. There'll also be a channel membership button. If you click on the join button down below, you can become a channel sponsor, or you can donate directly with a donation link in the video description. I also stream on Twitch, so when I'm live on Twitch you can head over there. And if you head over and give me a follow and then link your Amazon Prime account and become a Twitch Prime subscriber, that supports me as well, but it doesn't cost you anything to do it. So, might as well shill it, why not? It's not going to hurt anything. But that being said, let's get into the video. So, like I said, this apparently has a charging issue. It seems in relatively good condition. It's got a slight bit of bend, which is normal for these particular consoles. And, yeah, overall it's not too bad. I don't believe it's ever been worked on before. The Joy-Cons and not scratched or anything like that, which is nice to see. Nice to see they're fairly well looked after. Like I said, there is a little bit of bending, but that's, you know, it's a Nintendo Switch. It happens to them all eventually. So this has apparently got a charging issue. So the first thing that we need to do is establish exactly what kind of current is being drawn from the system. And the reason for that is because that's going to give us a general indication of what's actually going on. But the one thing I do want to do before I do that is just inspect the charger port under the microscope. The reason for that is because if the charger port is severely damaged, then we could cause some undesired effects. So we could cause it to end up blowing one of the chips when they're not blown already. Or it could cause another issue. So it could cause something like a dead CPU. So let's inspect the charger port underneath the microscope, and then we'll take it from there. Right you are, so taking a look at the charger port here, then I can definitely see some damaged pins inside there. So I'm going to get some tweezers and just see if I can show you exactly what I'm looking at here. It's fairly difficult hanging this over the edge of the table, so my hands are a little bit shaky, excuse that. Those who say you need steady hands for this work, well, you haven't seen mine. Well, you have now. But basically, we've got a damaged pin just there. So you can see that bent pin there. Well, when I actually get it into focus. We've got a damaged pin just there. So it's definitely damaged. We've also got some damaged pins on the left-hand side. As you can see there, nice and bent. If we flip it around, we'll take a look on the other side. The other side's actually not too bad, but it is definitely damaged there. Alright, so we've definitely at least got a damaged charger port here then, so we're going to need to take this apart, and we're going to need to try and get that sorted, but we also need to test out some of the other things. I'm not going to plug this in because it does have damaged pins, and it does stand a chance that it could cause further damage if I plug in a charger. So I'm not going to plug it into a charger, I'm just going to take it apart, get that port off, get it replaced, and then do some more tests afterwards. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is just take out the Y screws. So this is going to be a Y00 which I'm using here. So we need to take out these Y screws. These are Nintendo's proprietary screws. So you do need something like a iFixit kit or a special screwdriver just to be able to open these up. I will say as well that if you don't feel like you're going to be capable to do this repair, then I do offer repair services, so there's a website address in the video description. So you're more than welcome to send it in, and obviously the price depends on the repair itself, but typically most repairs I do on Nintendo Switches, they range from between £50 and £70 as a general rule, plus return postage, of course. So if you don't feel like you're capable of doing it yourself, then you're more than welcome to get in touch, and I'd be happy to oblige. And hopefully I can get your console working too. So this is a PH00 which I'm using here. We do have some damage to this thread, which is fine, it's perfectly normal. I'll get that screw out in a minute, it'll come out. Perfectly normal for those threads to end up damaged, to be honest. Doesn't necessarily mean anyone's ever been in here. Alright, so once the back cover is off, there you go, that screw pops out. That screw I won't be able to put back in, so unfortunately it will be one screw short. The thread is damaged, so it's not going to go back in. You do have the option of just gluing it in just for it to look good, but it's kind of pointless, to be honest. There we go, beautiful. Okay, so taking a look inside then, initial thoughts, it's completely clean. No liquid damage, no kind of issues there. This is the HAD motherboard, which is prone to a dead CPU. But I don't think that's the case here if the customer got the Nintendo logo. So I don't think this is going to be the case, but we are going to test it anyway. Now, one thing I do say when I'm working on a Nintendo Switch, a lot of people will tend to use continuity mode to test the capacitor around the CPU. That's not really a good idea, as I've figured out recently. So I used to use continuity mode myself as well when testing this capacitor just here. I know you can't see that yet, but I'm going to pop it under the scope. But I used to use continuity mode myself, and basically what I used to do was pop one probe on ground and test in continuity mode, listen for a beep, and that would tell me if I had a dead CPU. Now the problem is, some of the time the CPU can go, but it can be above 50 ohms, which on most multimeters won't beep. So you'll think it's a good CPU, you'll sit there wasting your time, and end up with a black screen of death. So I use resistance mode now, and that tells me the exact resistance reading. I think it should be around about 2 to 11,000 ohms. But basically, if you've got something like 300 ohms, which I believe I had recently, then you've still technically got a bad CPU. Now, one thing I will point out is when I test this capacitor here, there does stand a chance that it wouldn't be the CPU if it was showing up as short. But unfortunately, as I found out recently as well, this capacitor right here can be pretty much anything on the board. It can be the Joy-Con rails, it can be the fan, it can be the CPU, the RAM, P13 USB, the audio IC, the video display driver. It can be literally anything, and it's a rabbit hole and not worth actually figuring out what is actually wrong with it. Most of the time it's going to be the CPU, but you just don't know. So we're going to test that, and then I'm going to test the components around M92T36 as well as BQ24193. So by doing that, that's going to give me a general idea of what's actually going on with the system and what I'm going to need to do when I do take it apart. So I'll pop under the scope again and we'll take it from there. Right, okay, so the first thing I need to do, like I said, is test this capacitor just below M92T36. So this capacitor here, like I said, is linked to the CPU amongst other things, and it generally means that the device is unfixable when this goes bad, or when it reads as bad. So I'm going to test this in, like I said, resistance mode. So I'm going to pop the black probe on a ground point. I'll use the shield just off to the side of it, and I'll just pop the other probe on the top part of this component here, this capacitor. And we're reading 10.8 thousand ohms. So 10,800 ohms, which is perfectly normal. That means it's going to be absolutely fine to proceed. If we move on down, the next thing I want to test is this fuse. So we've got a fuse here just on the USB-C circuit. So I'm going to test that. And I'm going to be testing that. That was me that slipped with the probe there. So I'm going to be testing this in continuity mode, and as you can hear there, it beeps, which is absolutely fine. So then we're going to move on up to these components just around here. So I'll zoom out a little bit now. So we're going to have to take it apart. We're going to have to get P13 USB, M92 T36 and the charging port replaced. So this is a fair bit of collateral damage, unfortunately. So yeah, it is what it is, but sometimes these things happen. So I'll get this apart and we'll take it from there. I've got to get these screws out. So we need to remove the heatsink, we need to remove the screws, the game card reader and all of the ribbon connectors. There we go, that's got it. Okay, so I'm going to pop the LCD and the housing to one side because we're going to be working on the board. So I'm going to clean off this thermal paste, that'll get replaced before I put it back together. There we go, beautiful. Don't want that stuff all over your hands. Okay, so let's pop under the microscope and we'll take it from there. Okay, so just about ready to get this USB port off here. So the first thing that I always do is I remove the port and then test the components again, just in case I've been getting some false readings by the USB port. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use some hot air from underneath. So you can see just in the background here I've got my hot air. So I'll just literally hold this underneath and heat up at 440 degrees Celsius until the port comes loose. And I do that because basically I don't want to damage any components, and also I don't want to tear any traces. So I don't touch the port for around about 30 to 45 seconds. It depends on a few things like the ambient temperature in the room and things like that. But I don't touch this for around about 30 to 45 seconds depending on how long it takes. And I'll just keep on tapping the port every now and again just to see if it's loosened. I don't use any low melt solder or anything like that, and the reason for that is because I believe that when there's low melt solder on the ground legs and on this back row here, it puts more risk on the row that's hidden. So there's a hidden row just inside the port, and we can't get to that to put low melt solder on, so we don't want to end up melting everything else and causing the port to become loose and tearing the bottom row of traces. So just keep on heating this up. I think it's probably melted by now. Yep. So you can see it's just loosened up. And just do that. Just lift it off. Nice and straightforward. Comes off nice and easy. And while I've still got some heat on the board, I'm also going to clean out these ground holes. So I'll use a solder sucker and I'll clean out the ground holes as well at the same time. Okay, so there's one. Okay, I'll wick that one away because that one's been a little bit of a pain. So let's just heat up this side. Okay, they're actually all going to be a pain. It's going to be difficult to hold the board, so I'll wick them away. It's fine. I'd rather not keep heat there for a prolonged period of time. So I'll wick those pads away and clean them out. I'll get to those pads in a minute. But just in case I did get some false readings, I'm going to test around this area again. So as you can see, this is the M92 T36. And I'm going to go back into continuity mode. I'm going to put one probe on ground. I'll use the ground shield. Just make sure these are not shorted out and them not. Let's test this one. Yep, so we've got a beep on there. And a beep on there. So M92 T36 is definitely bad. P13 USB is definitely bad as well. So the reason I say P13 USB is bad is because that capacitor there, which I just tested, is directly linked to P13 USB on the back of the board. So if we flip the board around, you can see we've got that chip there, P13 USB, and that capacitor just below it. If we pop one probe on ground, is it the other one that's linked to P13 USB? It might be the one just below it. I always get them two mixed up, so this might not be as bad as I actually thought. So that's not showing up as short. Alright, well, let's get M92 T36 off instead then. So I did contact the customer when I done the initial diagnosis, but I might need to re-quote for a lower quote. So basically, because it looks like that one chip hasn't failed, I'm not going to be charging the customer the amount that I quoted. I quoted £85 to replace the USB port, M92 T36 and P13 USB. But if P13 USB hasn't failed, then obviously I can reduce that price, and I'll reduce it to £70 rather than the £85 that I originally quoted. So basically, just because I've quoted one price, it doesn't mean I can't lower it. Sometimes we have to raise it, and sometimes we have to lower it. It's all about being honest with the customers. So let's get M92T36 removed. So I'm still at 440 degrees Celsius here. My hands are incredibly shaky today for some reason. Okay, there we go. So that's M92T36 removed. Let's just confirm that the short is going to have disappeared because we've removed that chip. So one probe on ground, I'll use the middle pad here. That's a ground point. And as you can see, we've no longer got a short on one side of that capacitor, which is fine. And we've no longer got a short on that capacitor as well. So it does look like this quote is going to be adjusted, which is fine. I don't mind. I'm not out to get as much money as I can from my customers. The main thing is getting it working and doing it as cheaply as possible. Because if I do it as cheaply as possible, then they're going to come back to me. That is the bottom line. So basically, I'll adjust the quote and do it a little bit cheaper as long as it fixes it without having to replace any more components. One thing I do want to do before I do anything else is just test these filters. So I want to make sure that the filters are good. I wouldn't charge anything extra for filters, to be honest, but I do want to make sure the filters are good before I proceed, because I don't really want to be putting the USB port on if I've got to use heat in this area. So still in continuity mode here then. So we're going to test for continuity from the top to the bottom, and we should get a beep. We don't want continuity from left to right. So basically we'll test those. There's two filters on each one, as you can see by the traces. So we'll test for those and make sure that we've got no crosstalk and we've got no dead filters. So the filters do sometimes act as a fuse when we have a damaged charger port or a damaged chip. And sometimes the filter will blow and it will protect the rest of the circuit. It's just basically a coil of wire inside. The most common one to go is the far left one. If that one hasn't gone, then usually we've not got an issue. But it's always best to check them all anyway, just to make sure. And they seem absolutely fine. So what we need to do then is we need to replace M92T36, and we also need to remove the old solder from here and replace it with some leaded solder and then wick that away. So we replace it with leaded solder because it will lower the melting temperature and allow us to clean out the holes a lot easier. So leaded solder 6040, we can't solder without flux. What we could, there's flux inside the solder, but not nearly enough for my opinion. So I'll replace the solder with some leaded solder. Just allow that heat to transfer. And the same for this one down here. There we go. Beautiful. Perfect. Okay, so like I said, now we need to wick this away. So basically, the reason that we wick it away is so as we can drop the new port on and not have to worry about melting the ground legs at the same time. It just means that we've got to use less heat to actually install a new port. It prevents damage to the port, and it also kind of mitigates the possibility of damage for the rest of the board while we're using heat in that area as well. So we just use some solder wick. This is Chemtronics wick, which I'm using at the minute, mainly because I've run out of Goot wick. I usually use Goot wick, but I've run out. So we're just going to wick this area away. Whoops, I've just realised you can't see. Never mind. So if you find that it's struggling to actually clean out, just use a bit of hot air with it, just for a couple of seconds. Okay, I'm going to clean off the wick, and then that way I can do it properly. Nothing seems to be going my way today for some reason. I'll just drop a piece of wick there. Let's just zoom out so as you can see properly. And I'll use a little bit of hot air. That's perfect. Well, almost. A little bit of solder left in there. Beautiful. Nice and clean. And then what we need to do as well is we need to replace the solder on the port itself. So I'll start that by cleaning it, prepping it. I'm just going to prep the area. Ah, I've picked up a bleeding thermal paste cleaning thing. Oh, that's the proper name for it, okay? It's a thermal paste cleaning thing. Well, that's a bit stupid of me. No, it's fine. It'll clean up. I've just picked up a cotton swab off the desk. It's the one I use to clean the thermal paste off with. Ah, dearie me. When will I learn, eh? When will I learn? Well, never mind. There we go. Nice and clean. Let's get rid of that thermal paste off the desk as well. I'm such a numpty sometimes. Let's get rid of that liquid damage indicator because that is kind of irrelevant. Alright, so like I said, what we need to do is just clean off the old solder. Well, we need to actually replace it with some leaded solder. Still got a little bit of isopropyl alcohol on the desk, but that's fine, it'll dry off in a minute. Alright, there we go. So, all we need to do here is just add some leaded solder to the mix, and that's going to lower the melting temperature. Told you nothing's going my way today. New year, new problems. So, again, leaded solder, 60-40. Okay. And that's ready for a new port. So, here's the new port, just here. As you can see, nice brand new port. Buy these from AliExpress. These are literally around about £1 each, not very expensive. But what I'm going to do first is I'm going to prep the port to increase the chances of getting a successful connection on that hidden row of pins. So the way I'll do that is just to add some flux, and then I'm going to pre-tin the pins on the actual port itself, and that will basically just increase the chances of actually getting a nice connection the first time round. So I'll just add some solder to my iron, hold the port down, and then just run the iron across. There we go. Beautiful. Okay, back to the edge of the desk it goes. Alright, so now that's ready. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to heat up the area. So I'm going to take the nozzle off, and this time I'm going to do it from the top of the board because I want to heat up those pins directly. So still at 440 degrees Celsius at 40% airflow, I'm just going to heat up this area, and all the time that I'm heating up the area I'm holding the port in a pair of tweezers. So you might be wondering why I tinned the test points as well. I tinned the test points as well just above the port because when I see those melt I'm going to know that the pins are melted, or rather the pads where the pins are. It's going to tell me that the pins are melted and that I can drop the port on safely. They've got nice and shiny, so I can drop the port on. Just line up the port and then press down. I'm going to keep on flowing it for about another 5 to 10 seconds. And then I'm just going to wait and hold the port in place. Just wait for that solder to solidify, just like that. And now I know that the solder on the port is solid because I pre-tinned the test points as well. So when these go solid, I know that these are solid. But now I just need to finish off the port. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some more flux, and then I'm going to run the soldering iron across the pins just to make sure we've got a nice contact on the pins themselves. So I'm going to take some more leaded solder, And there we go. That should be nice and soldered. So let's just do the back ground legs now. Let's anchor this port down. So we'll add some more flux. There we go. Again, with leaded solder. Okay, and now what I want to do is just make sure that we've got enough solder pushed through those legs to the other side. So I'm going to heat it up for a few seconds and then run the iron across. And that's going to allow the solder to drop through. Gravity's going to take it and move it away for a second. I don't want to melt those pins again. All I want to do is just make sure enough solder gets through. There we go. Alright, let's clean that area up. A bit of isopropyl alcohol. And a cotton swab. Okay, perfect. Just what I'm looking for, a nice clean board with some nice shiny solder joints. And when I turn this round in a second, we should have solder on the other side as well. And we have indeed. So enough solder has gone through. You can see that solder come through to this side. Same as on the back legs as well, so that's perfectly fine. I know for a fact that the port is anchored in from both sides, which is what I was going for. Just clean off this side. Beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. Okie dokie, so what I want to do now is just make sure that these pins are actually soldered. So I'm going to give all of these pins a good nudge. Just make sure they don't move. Perfect. So no loose pins and everything seems hunky-dory. On to the final stage, M92T36. So we're going to install a new chip. So I'm going to take a brand new chip here. I'm going to line it up. So this arrow here needs to line up with this dot here that indicates pin number 1. So we make sure that lines up. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the hot air to flow this down partially before I add any flux. The reason for that is because by the time it actually melts the solder, the flux is just going to float away. So if I partially solder it down and then add some flux, then it will flow it properly. And with my hot air, again, 440 degrees Celsius at 40% airflow, I'm going to hold the chip down. And I knew that wind was going to take that. It doesn't have to be perfectly aligned because surface tension is going to pull the chip in a little while. So I'm going to tack it down just partially. And then when I let go of this, it shouldn't really move. Yep, so the board is moving with the chip, which is fine. That's what I'm looking for. So now I'll just add some flux. This just minimises the amount of mess that you're going to make on the board. If you partially tack the chip down first, and then you use your hot air to solder it properly with flux, then it just minimises the amount of flux that's on the board. Surface tension should pull this in. Okay, get ready. Come on, it's just dropped. There we go. Just give the chip a tap and you see it nudge back into place. That's how we know that it's soldered and centred. So with that done, I can push down on the chip. We want this chip as flat to the board as we can. So we're going to reflow it again. And you're going to see a little bit of solder squeeze out. There we go, so we've got a nice little blob just there, which is fine again. Just going to add a tad more flux, and then I'm just going to come in and tap that one area with the iron. So you may notice I didn't change the solder on this. It's because there's nothing wrong with it. There's absolutely nothing wrong with the solder. I just realised you couldn't even see that. It was literally a minimal tap for a second. But there's nothing wrong with the solder that was there, so there's no need to change it. The solder is more than sufficient, and you can usually take these chips off 2 or 3 times before you've got to replace the solder. And that's it, we're done. Or at least we should be. apart from the quite obvious final clean. So I just want to clean this off, make sure that we've got a nice clean board. We don't want to put this back in with flux all over it. Flux, even though it won't hurt the board, it looks messy, so we don't want it there. If I got my Nintendo Switch or any console back for that matter and it had flux all over the board, I'd be pretty peeved. I wouldn't be happy at all. So make sure your board is nice and clean for when it goes back to your customer. Assuming you're doing it for a customer, that is. If you're doing it for yourself, you know, it's your board, do what you want, it's not going to hurt the board, or at least most fluxes won't. I know the stuff I use, King Bowl, won't. I did do a test, I left flux on a board for 12 months, and it didn't do anything to it. So, it should be fine, but I always recommend cleaning anyway. Right, so let's just inspect the work. If we inspect now, it means we haven't got to come back later. So if we take a look at the joint there, you can see that we've got a very slight amount of gold, and basically that is the gold point on the chip itself, and as you can see it lines up literally absolutely 100% perfect with the solder joints on that side, and the same with that one, lines up 100% perfect. That side is fine, perfect, and that side is perfect. Good, I'm happy. Okay, so that is pretty much all she wrote. That's pretty much all we've got to do. So the one issue that I've got here is that I'm going to have to wait, you know, a good 20 minutes or so for this battery to charge. So I've got a little trick up my sleeve to be able to test it before then, just for the sake of, well, pretty much ending the video and keeping it as short as possible without having to edit too much out. And that is basically a little mod which I've made. It's a circuit board out of a battery on a bench supply cable. So two reasons I do that. The first reason is because I don't want to sit there and wait for the battery to charge in order to test it. And the second reason is that it allows me to see the boot process in the form of a current draw. So it tells me what's going on based on what kind of current is being drawn from the system. And then if it's not booting, I can generally figure out what's going on pretty much straight away just by looking at how much current is being drawn from the system. So it serves a very good purpose. It saves time, and it also allows me to see what's going on. So I can charge this while the customer's on the way to pick it up. That's not a problem. So I can literally move on to something else and not have to worry about it. What I can't do is get this bleeding board back in. So I'm going to unscrew the fan top plate. There we go. There is a screw that I want to put in, and that's that one there, because when we put the game card reader in a minute, then we're not going to be able to access that particular screw. But I may as well put all of the 4 board screws back in. That's not going to hurt too much if it doesn't turn on. So I'll get this partially reassembled for test, and we'll pick up the video from there. I will just have a look and see how much power is actually in the battery. It could just be a little bit dead. Okay, so meter in voltage mode then. Let's just get a reading on the battery. And our survey says 3.3 volts. That's a little bit low, so I'm going to use the bench supply instead. It's a little bit low. It's going to take a fair amount of time to charge that up. 3.3 volts. So what I've got here is, like I said, the board from out of a Nintendo Switch. So this is a official Nintendo Switch battery board, and basically that is then going to a breakout cable for my bench power supply. If I supply that with 4.2 volts, that will replicate a 100% charged battery, and that will basically allow me to turn the console straight on. Because I've unplugged it, I'm going to need to activate it, because I had it unplugged. So I'm going to need to activate it most likely. Oh, no, I'm not. There we go, 166 milliamps. Nintendo draw, Nintendo logo. Nintendo Switch. And we booted. This is working. Touchscreen works. Let's turn up the volume so I can hear it. Yep, absolutely fine. So I'm going to run through a couple of tests now and just make sure that everything is working as expected. So the first thing I'll test is going to be the Joy-Cons. That one connects absolutely fine. And that one connects absolutely fine as well. Joy-Cons appear absolutely fine. And let's test a Joy-Con with a lower battery just to see if they're charging. Yes, they are, so we've got a charging symbol there. Perfect. So if the Joy-Cons wasn't charging, then we would most likely not have any fan spin, but that's not going to kick in until we actually need it. So I always do that just to make sure. And next I'm going to test the Wi-Fi and make sure that's working. Networks, the coder, there we go. Perfect. Wi-Fi is working. Let's test it with a game. Perfect. I've just felt the fan spin as well. That did kick in for a second there. There we go. So it is kicking in now, the fan is, which is fine. And let's just make sure it loads the software. Perfect. Friends on line 1, it's showing as working, which is fine. Couple more things to test. First thing being the dock. So I need to test it on the dock and make sure that works. So I've got here another breakout cable, and this breakout cable goes straight to the dock, and that's basically going to allow me to test it on there. So I'll just hook that up to my capture card now. Okay, so I'm going to plug this in, and there we go. So that's gone to 0 amps current draw on the bench supply, which means it's being powered by the dock. So bear with me a second and I'll check that out. Sorry about the focus there. And there we go. That is loading on the dock absolutely fine. I'll just move around with the Joy-Con there, and as you can see, it's all working beautifully. Alright, so that's all working. The final thing to do is just make sure it charges both sides of the charger. It should do, because it is docking, which means that essentially it's working. And it is coming up as 0 amps current draw. Let me just, there you go. So you can see it says console battery 100%. So it's not going to charge because the battery's, well, supposedly full. But there you go. It's coming up when I flip the charger around, so it's working both sides. It's docking. A game's playing. Everything is absolutely perfect. Right, and there we go. So while I've been editing this video, I've been charging this up, and it's now on 72%. Which means that it's ready to go back to the customer. Everything is working perfectly fine, and this console is going to live once again. So by replacing M92 T36 and by replacing the charger port, I was able to get this working again. I was wrong about P13 USB. I've already called the customer and given her the great news that she hasn't got to pay the £85. She's only got to pay £70. So it's a little bit of good news for the customer in that she hasn't got to pay as much as she first expected. I never try to deceive my customers in any way. If I give them a quote and then I'm wrong about the initial diagnosis, I will happily change it. You know, I'm not out to get as much money as I possibly can from the customer. I'm out to do the job. I'm out to do the best job I possibly can and make some good content while I'm at it. So let me know what you think down in the comment section down below. I always do my best to read and reply to as much comments as I can. If you do want to organise your own repair, you can do so by getting in touch using the website address in the video description. Just head over to the website, you can book in the repair, you can see some common repair prices, or you can contact me using the contact page as well. If you need any help with anything, I'll leave a link to Discord down in the video description. Head over to Discord, join my Discord server, and there's plenty of people on the Discord channel who might be able to help with your specific issue. If you find this video useful, if you find my information useful, you know, if you're learning anything, then by all means you're more than welcome to support me. There's a Patreon link in the video description. There's also a channel sponsorship by clicking on the join button down below the video, or you can send me a direct donation through either PayPal, which will go to my partner's account, or you can send me a donation through Square, which is the payment process I use for the repairs. So if you want to support me, you can do that. You can also head over to Twitch and link your Amazon Prime account. It does help out the channel a lot. But that's going to be it for now. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you've had a fantastic 2021, and I hope you have an even better 2022. Happy New Year to everyone. Thank you very much. And one more thing before I go, a huge congratulations to TronicFix for reaching 1 million subscribers around about half an hour ago. I'll leave a link to his channel in the video description as well. I've just found out he's basically got 1 million subscribers. So massive congrats to Steve from Sonic Fix. If you don't know who he is, absolutely recommend you check him out. And that's going to be it. So thank you very much for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later. Bye for now.